I recently found myself in a situation that should not have happened and frankly, couldn't have imagined happening. I've decided to share this secret story on an internet forum, known for its empathetic reading of personal tales. My wife is the youngest of 3 daughters. To me, she's not only the most beautiful, but also the brightest among her sisters. Despite having a child, she works hard and sometimes even travels abroad for work. All her sisters are married. The eldest lives at the farthest end of our country, making family gatherings a rare occurrence. Last year, my father-in-law was suddenly diagnosed with cirrhosis and passed away. The main character of this story, the middle sister, lives near us. She has a fairly grown child and occasionally visits to adore and look after our baby, who is not yet a year old. Even though I rarely work late, there are times when I have to attend dinner meetings or prepare for conferences, and my wife comes home late. During such times, we rely on my sister-in-law to babysit. She loves the baby's smell and the formula smell and takes great care of our child. Her daughter also adores our baby, which makes us trust them even more. This time, for my mother-in-law's 70th birthday trip, we decided to go to Guam. Unfortunately, the eldest sister couldn't join because her child was in the middle of exams. The middle sister's husband was too busy to come, so it ended up being just my mother-in-law, the middle sister and her daughter, and our little family. I was the only man in the group. Traveling by bus in Guam was exhausting. On the first day, the women decided to go shopping at the mall, leaving me at the hotel to take care of my daughter and my niece. As the only man, I gave the ladies some free time. My daughter, who was flying for the first time, didn't cry and handled the flight well. She's quick on her feet, not even a year old, and already toddling around. She wandered the resort holding her cousin's hand, making it relatively easy to look after them. Even in Guam, my daughter ate her prepared baby food and formula without fuss, allowing us to enjoy our trip. During our free time, we enjoyed the resort's swimming pool, where everyone had a great time. My daughter wasn't afraid of the water, even though it was her first time swimming. My wife, who returned from shopping with her arms full of bags, tried on clothes she bought for herself for the first time since having our baby. Seeing her so excited and happy made me feel an unexpected rush of emotion. We quietly enjoyed our time together while making sure not to wake up our sleeping child. I work for a major corporation, receiving a hefty bonus every year. And although we have a small mortgage, my wife and I own a house together. With a beautiful wife and a lovely daughter, I consider myself the happiest man alive these days. However, on the second day of our trip, things took a strange turn. My wife became unusually irritable, leading to an unexpected argument. She found out I had been talking about her behind her back to her sister. Having a marital spat during a vacation certainly didn't help the mood. Pretending to be magnanimous, my wife said she'd go to bed early with our child because she couldn't stand the sight of me. As I mentioned before, my wife is the prettiest among her 3 sisters, though her sister is quite attractive as well. All 3 daughters of my mother-in-law are beautiful. My wife gained 20 during her pregnancy and is still concerned about the weight, whereas her sister is the tallest and slimmest among them, even though she eats the most at meals. My wife went to bed early, and her sister, not feeling sleepy, suggested we go out for a beer. Feeling down, I accepted her invitation, and we took a taxi to a nearby pub. It was convenient to easily obtain travel information through an app, even abroad. My mother-in-law was watching our niece, so my sister-in-law went all out with her makeup, looking very pretty. She has a darker skin tone, but a healthy and attractive face. We took a taxi to the bar, and she shared how happy she was to be on this trip, as she hadn't been out in the evenings for a while, due to raising a child, and had grown distant from her friends. Moreover, her husband doesn't drink, so she felt suffocated, drinking at home as he would give her disapproving looks. She was thrilled to be having a good time on this trip. My sister-in-law reassured me, saying, "Let's live through fights and disagreements. It's normal to argue during trips. Don't worry too much." We ended up drinking more than usual, and embarrassingly, I vomited. I was wearing thin cotton pants, which I had to dispose of, leaving me feeling quite embarrassed. My sister-in-law took out wet wipes from her bag to clean me up. Urging to return to our accommodation, we took a taxi, but my wife didn't answer the door, likely sleeping deeply. My sister-in-law was sleeping in her mother's room with her daughter, so I had no choice but to stay in my sister-in-law's room for a while. I took off my dirty clothes and washed them. After a refreshing shower, I planned to spend a short time in my sister-in-law's room before heading to my own room early in the morning. Continuing from the previous scenario, after the husband cleans up and returns from the bathroom, his sister-in-law smiles at him and comments in a low voice that his wife is lucky. He responds by revealing that since his wife became pregnant, they have not shared a room. His sister-in-law shares that she has also been sleeping in a separate room for years, and they spend the night together. She expresses envy towards her sister for having such a close relationship with him, mentioning it's her first time feeling this way. The husband reflects on his marriage, suggesting that not being close to a spouse who is attractive and kind might be akin to throwing away one's fortune. They complete their trip and keep in touch occasionally, with both understanding there are things left unsaid and undone between them. They decide not to pursue anything further, acknowledging the inappropriate nature of their situation, despite the occasional flutter of excitement. When his sister-in-law brings over homemade health foods, he chooses to accept only her kindness, recognizing the courage needed to stop before things go too far.
Who have come together to celebrate this milestone. The narrator describes how much effort went into planning the event, from booking Emily's favorite band to ensuring the catering included her beloved chocolate-dipped strawberries. This party was meant to showcase their bond and the pride he felt as a father. However, beneath the surface of the party's glamorous facade, subtle tension is brewing. Over the past few weeks, Emily had been acting unusually secretive, spending long hours on her phone, sneaking out for study sessions, and growing increasingly defensive when asked about her personal life. The narrator dismissed these behaviors as the typical growing pains of a teenager finding her independence. But tonight, those small cracks in their relationship weigh heavily on his mind as he watches her greet the guests with a mix of nervous excitement. The narrator shares a heartfelt moment, recalling a recent argument between Emily and her mother, Susan, about a friend Emily had refused to introduce to the family. Susan had chalked it up to a harmless teenage crush, but the narrator couldn't shake the unease growing in the back of his mind. As the final guests arrive and the party begins, the narrator is determined to make this night memorable for all the right reasons, unaware of the shocking revelation about to unfold. As the evening progresses, the narrator describes the party becoming livelier. Guests are mingling, Emily is laughing with her closest friends, and Susan is chatting with relatives near the poolside bar. The band plays a soft acoustic version of Emily's favorite song, adding a serene atmosphere to the celebration. The narrator takes a moment to reflect on how happy his daughter looks, her smile lighting up the garden as she poses for photos in her pastel blue dress. For a fleeting moment, the unease from earlier fades, and he feels proud of the event he orchestrated for his daughter. Just as the narrator begins to relax, the doorbell rings. A server opens it, revealing a man in his early 20s standing awkwardly on the front porch. He's sharply dressed with a confident air that doesn't match the bewildered expression on his face. The narrator watches from a distance as the man scans the crowd, hesitating for a moment before stepping inside. Something about him feels off. His age, for one, seems too old for Emily's circle of friends. The narrator senses the shift in energy as the man makes his way through the crowd, his eyes searching for someone. Emily spots him first. Her reaction is immediate and startling. Her face flushes, and she glances nervously toward her parents, clearly hoping they haven't noticed the newcomer. The narrator catches this exchange and feels a pang of suspicion. Who is this man? Why is his presence making Emily so visibly uncomfortable? Susan notices the interaction as well and leans in to whisper, "Do you know him?" The narrator shakes his head, but his gut tells him something isn't right. Emily quickly approaches the man, pulling him aside near the dessert table. Their conversation is hushed, their body language tense. The narrator begins to connect the dots. This stranger isn't just a random guest, and he certainly wasn't invited. 3. Piecing it together, the suspense intensifies. As Emily continues her hushed conversation with the mysterious man near the dessert table, the narrator grows increasingly suspicious. From his vantage point by the bar, he notices the subtle but telling signs. The way Emily nervously tugs at her necklace, the man's occasional glances toward the crowd, and their deliberate attempt to stay out of sight. The joyous backdrop of the party, the laughter of children, the soft melodies from the band, and the warm glow of the fairy lights strung across the garden only makes the tension in the air more pronounced. The narrator exchanges a glance with his wife, Susan, who is now watching the interaction with narrowed eyes. "Do you think we should ask Emily who he is?" she murmurs, her tone carefully measured. But before the narrator can respond, he notices something that makes his stomach churn. The man's hand briefly brushes against Emily's in a way that feels far too familiar. He begins to piece together the puzzle. This isn't just a friend from school or a co-worker Emily invited at the last minute. The man's age, his demeanor, and Emily's obvious discomfort suggest something deeper, something hidden. The narrator recalls the odd moments over the past few months. Emily's frequent late-night calls, her sudden interest in dressing up for study group sessions, and the times she'd brush off questions about her plans. The tension escalates when the man steps away, heading toward the drink station. Emily quickly intercepts him as if trying to shield him from the crowd. The narrator seizes the opportunity to step closer, pretending to grab a drink while eavesdropping on their conversation. Though their voices are low, he catches snippets. "I told you not to come, and I just wanted to see you." The realization hits him like a freight train. This man isn't just a guest, he's Emily's secret lover. The thought makes his blood boil, but he forces himself to stay calm. This is his daughter's birthday, and any rash action could ruin the night. Instead, he chooses to observe, waiting for the right moment to intervene. The narrator finally decides that the time for quiet observation is over. As Emily and her mysterious guest attempt to blend into the crowd, he calmly makes his way toward the stage where the microphone is set up for the cake-cutting announcement. The vibrant scene of the party, a backyard in Beverly Hills adorned with string lights, pastel balloons, and tables lined with delicately crafted desserts, provides a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside the narrator's mind. With an easy smile that masks his inner turmoil, the narrator taps the mic to grab the attention of the room. The chatter dies down, and all eyes turn to him, including Emily's, whose expression shifts from surprise to apprehension. "Ladies and gentlemen," he begins, his voice steady but laced with subtle intensity. "Before we cut this beautiful cake for Emily's 18th birthday, I'd like to give a special shout-out to one of our unexpected guests." The room falls into a tense silence as the narrator turns his gaze directly toward Emily's companion, who is now frozen near the dessert table. Emily's face flushes with panic, her attempts to signal the man to leave now glaringly obvious to everyone. The crowd's attention shifts between the narrator, Emily, and the man, their curiosity and unease growing with each second. "Mr. Guest," the narrator continues, the sarcasm in his tone now unmistakable, "would you like to join us at the cake table? After all, you seem to have been such an important part of Emily's life lately." His words land like a thunderclap, leaving the crowd stunned. The guests exchange whispers. Susan stiffens in her chair, and Emily looks as though she wants the earth to swallow her whole. The man, caught off guard, hesitates before awkwardly stepping forward. His confident demeanor from earlier is now replaced with visible discomfort. Emily rushes to intercept him, mumbling something inaudible, but the damage has already been done. The atmosphere of the party shifts dramatically, with the cheerful energy replaced by palpable tension. The narrator's deliberate choice to stage the confrontation publicly leaves no room for denial. By now, the stakes are clear to everyone present, and the suspense has reached its boiling point. The emotional buildup from earlier, Emily's secretive behavior, the man's inappropriate presence, and the narrator's growing suspicions, culminates in a scene that will define the rest of the evening. The moment after the confrontation is a cocktail of chaos and silence. The guests remain frozen in their places, their curious eyes locked on Emily, her guest, and the narrator. In the glamorous backyard of their Beverly Hills home, once full of laughter and music, the air now feels heavy, as if the perfectly arranged string lights are dimming in sync with the mood. Emily, her face pale and flushed in alternating waves, stammers, "Dad, this isn't what it looks like." But the narrator is no longer in the mood for evasions. His voice, calm yet cutting, interrupts her attempt to explain, "Emily, I've been your father long enough to know when something's wrong. Now is not the time for half-truths." The mysterious man, Nathan, as Emily blurts out during the heated exchange, attempts to salvage the situation. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he begins, but the narrator cuts him off, his gaze sharp. "Misunderstanding? Nathan, what kind of misunderstanding brings a grown man to an 18-year-old's birthday party uninvited?" Nathan glances at Emily, clearly caught off guard by how quickly the situation has spiraled. Emily, cornered by the pressure of the moment and the whispers of the guests, finally snaps. "Fine, we've been seeing each other," she says, her voice trembling. Gasps ripple through the crowd, and Susan visibly recoils in shock, her wine glass trembling in her hand. The confession hangs in the air like a grenade, detonating the carefully curated facade of the party. The narrator takes a deep breath, his mind racing as he processes the revelation. A flurry of emotions, betrayal, anger, and disappointment flickers across his face, but he keeps his composure. "Seeing each other?" he echoes, his tone icy. "Nathan, do you have any idea how inappropriate this is? You've crossed a line." Nathan attempts to defend himself, claiming he truly cares for Emily, but the narrator isn't buying it. The crowd is now fully engaged, their eyes darting between the unfolding drama and each other, murmuring in disbelief. Emily pleads with her father, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, please, he's not what you think. I love him." The narrator, torn between his paternal instinct to protect his daughter and his rage at Nathan's audacity, looks at Emily with both heartbreak and resolve. "Love?" he says quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emily, love doesn't hide in the shadows. Love doesn't show up uninvited to family events like a thief in the night." The fallout becomes unavoidable. The guests, sensing the weight of the moment, begin to discreetly leave, understanding this family matter is beyond their place. Nathan, realizing he's overstayed his welcome, awkwardly excuses himself, but not before the narrator warns him in a voice laced with finality. "You will never step foot in this house again. Do you understand me?" Emily, devastated and humiliated, runs inside, leaving her father standing alone on the stage. The once celebratory atmosphere has completely disintegrated, replaced by an overwhelming silence. The narrator watches as the last of the guests filter out, his heart heavy, but resolute. The fallout has not only changed the evening, it has permanently shifted the dynamics of their family. As the first rays of sunlight stream through the wide windows of their Beverly Hills kitchen, the narrator sits at the polished marble counter, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. The house, which had been buzzing with laughter, music, and eventually chaos just hours before, now feels eerily quiet. The events of the previous night play on a loop in his mind: Nathan's unexpected arrival, Emily's heartbreaking confession, and the stunned silence of their guests as they slipped away one by one. The calm of the morning is interrupted by the soft shuffle of footsteps. Emily appears in the doorway, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She hesitates for a moment, then walks into the room, clutching a tissue in her hand. "Dad," she begins, her voice trembling. The narrator looks up, his expression unreadable, and gestures for her to sit. Through tears, Emily begins to apologize, her words tumbling out in a mixture of regret and desperation. She explains how she had felt misunderstood and pressured by the family's high expectations. "You and Mom always want everything to be perfect," she says, her voice breaking. "But I needed to make my own choices, even if they weren't perfect." The narrator listens intently, his coffee untouched. For the first time, he begins to see the cracks beneath Emily's confident exterior. Her rebellion, though misguided, was her way of asserting independence in a world where she often felt confined. He takes a deep breath before responding, choosing his words carefully. "Emily," he says, his tone steady but firm, "I've always wanted the best for you, not to control you, but to protect you. Love is a powerful thing, but it's not an excuse to ignore boundaries or make reckless decisions." Their conversation shifts into a heartfelt father-daughter talk, the tension of the previous night giving way to a fragile sense of understanding. The narrator sets boundaries, explaining that while he loves her unconditionally, trust isn't something that can be repaired overnight. "Respect has to go both ways," he says. "You have to trust that I'm looking out for you, and I have to trust that you'll make choices with integrity and thought." Emily nods tearfully, understanding the gravity of her actions and the pain she caused. The narrator doesn't shy away from addressing Nathan's behavior, reminding her that love should be built on mutual respect, honesty, and transparency, not secrecy and lies. The kitchen fills with a tense yet hopeful silence as both father and daughter begin to pick up the pieces of their strained relationship. As days pass, the chaos of that unforgettable evening at the birthday party begins to settle. The narrator, sitting on the deck of their Los Angeles home overlooking the shimmering Pacific Ocean, reflects on the series of events that fractured, yet strangely illuminated, their family dynamic. He admits to himself that the night was a wake-up call, a painful, unexpected moment that forced them to confront truths they had been avoiding. Emily, though still grappling with the weight of her, started to show a new sense of maturity. She's been making small but meaningful efforts to rebuild trust, sharing more openly, sticking to her commitments, and spending quality time with her parents. The narrator watches her carefully, his heart heavy but hopeful. Trust, he knows, is fragile and takes time to repair, but the effort on both sides signals a step in the right direction. The narrator reflects on the lessons learned, acknowledging that family relationships, much like life itself, are inherently messy. No family is perfect, he thinks, and no bond comes without its tests. The events at the party underscored that love, though often tested by mistakes and misunderstandings, has the power to endure if both parties are willing to fight for it. As he sips his coffee on a crisp California morning, he smiles faintly, imagining a brighter future for Emily. He hopes this experience has taught her that choices, especially in matters of the heart, must come from a place of respect for oneself and others. He silently vows to support her in her journey, not as a controlling figure, but as a guiding hand she can always rely on. Ending with a note of optimism, the narrator shares his thoughts with the audience. Family isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about how you face them together. Yes, trust was broken, but I believe we're stronger for it. Emily and we're learning to understand each other better, and that's something I'll cherish forever. Thank you for being a part of this story with me if it moved you. Please give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to Narrative Stories. I've noticed many of you who enjoy these stories aren't subscribed yet by subscribing. You're not just following a channel, you're becoming part of a community that values deep, meaningful storytelling. Let's continue exploring these heartfelt journeys together. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you won't miss our next steep. I usually don't ask this early, but if you could like the video and subscribe, it would mean a lot. We're so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support can really help get my content out there. Thanks. Hey everyone, Liam here. I've been through a lot lately. I thought sharing my story might help someone else out there, especially if you're going through a rough time in your relationship. This is the story of how I caught my wife cheating at a winter writing workshop in Tasmania and how I dealt with it. Buckle up, because it's a long one. Let me start by introducing myself. I'm Liam Reynolds, a 38-year-old marketing manager from Melbourne, Australia. I've been with my wife, Isabella, for 12 years, and we've had what I thought was a strong marriage. We've always been the kind of couple that communicates well, or so I believe. Isabella, who's 36, is a writer. She's published a couple of short stories, a few articles, and has been working on a novel for what feels like forever. Writing is her passion, her escape from the mundane. For years, I supported her in this dream. She would lock herself in her office for hours, writing, reading, editing, and I'd be there with cups of coffee, reading her drafts, even when they didn't make sense. Honestly, I thought we were in a good place, but as they say, life can turn upside down when you least expect it. The beginning of doubts. Everything started one winter evening in late June. Isabella came home excited, her cheeks flushed from cold Melbourne wind. She told me about this writing workshop she wanted to attend. It was a prestigious event held in Tasmania during winter, something about the isolated, cold environment inspiring creativity. She made it sound so innocent. She even showed me the website, the guest speakers, and some of the workshops they'd be offering. One name stood out to her. Tom Harrington, a 42-year-old best-selling novelist from Sydney. I had heard of him before. He had this rugged reputation, a literary bad boy who loved to break rules both in life and on the page. I didn't think much of it at first. Isabella admired many writers, but I noticed the way her face lit up when she talked about Tom. Still, I trusted her. I didn't want to be a paranoid husband. The workshop was 2 weeks long and it was pricey. We weren't struggling financially, but it was a considerable amount of money. Despite the cost, I told her to go for it. After all, it's not like she went to workshops all the time, and this one sounded like a big deal. The workshop begins. A week before the workshop, things started to feel different. It wasn't something obvious, but I noticed that Isabella was more distant, more distracted. She wasn't as affectionate, and our conversations felt forced. When I brought it up, she shrugged it off, saying it was just stress about the upcoming workshop and her novel. That seemed reasonable, so I didn't press further. The day she left for Tasmania, I drove her to the airport. She kissed me goodbye, telling me she'd miss me, but something felt off. Call it intuition, call it gut instinct. That's when the first real pang of doubt hit me. As I drove back home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. But I didn't want to be that insecure, controlling husband. So I buried it. For now. The first week. The first few days of workshop seemed normal. Isabella sent texts about the writing exercises they were doing, the cold but beautiful Tasmanian landscape, and how the group was bonding over late-night discussions about literature by the fire. She also mentioned Tom a lot. At first, it was in passing. Tom said this amazing thing today, or Tom's giving me feedback on my draft. I figured she was just impressed by his talent. He was, after all, the keynote speaker at the workshop. But by the middle of the first week, her texts became shorter and our calls less frequent. When I did manage to get her on the phone, she was distracted, her voice distant. I started to worry, but again, I pushed it aside. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe she was just deeply engrossed in her writing. The workshop schedule was more demanding than she expected. Still, something about the way she mentioned Tom, how her enthusiasm for the workshop seemed to revolve more around him than the actual writing, made me uneasy. By the end of the first week, things took a turn. She stopped texting me goodnight like she usually did. And when I called, she'd either not answer or give me some vague excuse about being tired or in the middle of something with the group. I could sense she was lying. The disconnect between us felt like it had widened into a chasm. That's when my gut instinct really kicked in. I couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on. I talked to my best mate, Josh, about it, and he told me straight up, "Mate, if you think something's wrong, Azrania, we need to find out." I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to be the guy who suspects his wife of cheating without proof. But the doubts were eating me alive, and I knew I couldn't just ignore it. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. The private investigator. I got in touch with Ben, a P recommended to me by a friend of a friend. Ben was the real deal, former cop, sharp as a tack, and discreet. He told me he'd fly out to Tasmania and keep tabs on Isabella for a few days, just to see if anything suspicious was going on. Those were some of the longest days of my life. Every time my phone buzzed, I thought it was going to be Ben with some horrible news. My mind kept going dark places, imagining all the worst-case scenarios. Then, 4 days later, I got the call. "Liam, mate, I'm going to send you something, but I gotta warn you, it's not good." My heart sank as I waited for the photos to come through. When they did, I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. There they were, Isabella and Tom, walking hand in hand through the workshop grounds, sneaking off to a secluded cabin late at night. The look on her face was one I hadn't seen in years: excitement, passion, joy. And it wasn't for me. Confronting the truth. I stared at the photos for hours, disbelief turning to rage, then sadness, then something else entirely. How could she do this to me? How could she betray everything we'd built together? But I wasn't ready to confront her just yet. I needed to plan this out. I wasn't going to let my emotions get the better of me. Ben kept me updated, sending more photos and details over the next few days. It was the same pattern. They meet up late at night, away from the group, and spend hours together in that cabin. Sometimes they'd go for long walks along the misty cliffs, their bodies close, the kind of intimacy that had clearly developed over time. By the time Isabella returned home, I had all the evidence I needed. I could feel the tension as soon as she walked through the door. She tried to act normal, hugging me, telling me she missed me, handing me a souvenir, a leather-bound notebook of all things. The irony wasn't lost on me. The confrontation. I waited a day before I confronted her. I wanted to give myself time to cool off, to think things through. Then that evening, I asked her to sit down. I could see the worry in her eyes, the way she avoided looking directly at me. "Isabella," I began, "I know about Tom." Her face went pale, and for a moment I saw genuine fear in her eyes. She tried to deny it, stammering about how Tom was just a mentor, that I was overreacting. But then I showed her the photos. I laid everything out, the late-night meetings, the secret walks, the hours spent in that cabin. Her face crumpled and she started crying, begging for forgiveness, saying it was a mistake, that she hadn't meant for it to happen. She told me she loved me, she'd do anything to fix this. But it was too late. The damage was done. I told her I needed time to think, and for the next few days I barely spoke to her. I didn't know what to do, didn't know if I could ever trust her again. Revenge and resolution. After a week's silence, I made my decision. I wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. Instead of just walking away, I gave her an ultimatum. Either she comes clean to our friends and family, or I would. I wanted her to face the consequences of what she'd done. She thought I was bluffing, but she was wrong. When she refused to come clean, I took matters into my own hands. I called up our closest friends, my family, even parents, and I told them the truth. I didn't sugarcoat it. I laid out the facts. She had an affair with a man she met at the workshop, and I had the evidence to prove it. The fallout was immediate. Our friends were shocked, her parents were devastated, and Isabella, well, she was furious at first. But eventually she realized that she had no one to blame but herself. She had destroyed our marriage, and now she had to live with the consequences. The aftermath. In the months that followed, we separated. Isabella moved out, and I filed for divorce. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. But in the end, I knew it was the right decision. I couldn't stay with someone who had betrayed me so deeply. As for Tom, I don't know what happened to him. After the workshop ended, he disappeared from Isabella's life, as far as I know. Maybe he moved on to the next writing retreat, the next woman. It didn't matter. He wasn't my problem. What I did learn from this whole experience, though, was that sometimes the best revenge is simply moving on. I didn't need to ruin her life or make her suffer. The knowledge that she had lost me and the life we'd built together was enough. That's my story. It wasn't easy to go through, and it's not easy to share. I hope it resonates with someone out there. If you're going through something similar, just remember, you deserve honesty, loyalty, and respect. And if you're not getting that, then it might be time to move on. Thanks for sticking with me to the end of this long story. What would you have done in my shoes? How would you have handled the betrayal? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay strong, and until next time.
My wife always had a way of drawing people in. She was charming, confident, and could easily win over anyone in a room. Her personality was soft, yet magnetic, and it was one of the things that initially caught my attention. I liked that she wasn't overly emotional, that she'd keep her composure even in the most challenging situations. It felt like we balanced each other well. I'm more of a straightforward guy, strict and structured. For me, everything in life has a place, including relationships. I value loyalty above all else, and I always thought she shared that belief. We had a routine that worked for both of us. I worked hard to provide, and she kept everything running smoothly at home. There was a sense of predictability in our lives that I appreciated. I knew what to expect from her, and she knew what to expect from me. We never really needed words to understand each other. Our actions spoke for us. It was that kind of silent understanding that I believed made our marriage solid. Nothing seemed out of place. We weren't one of those couples who needed constant drama or excitement. Stability was what mattered most to me. One thing that always stood out was how comfortable we had become with each other. There was a natural flow to our relationship, no need for constant reassurance or questioning. I didn't hover over her, and she didn't overanalyze my every move. It was a mutual respect for each other's space. I liked that. It made things easy. Trust for me was everything, and I didn't need to monitor her every step because I believed she wouldn't give me a reason to. We also had clear understanding that came to intimacy. Over the years, we had settled into a rhythm. No unnecessary fuss, no barriers between us, which I thought was a sign of how strong our bond was. Things were simple, and I valued that simplicity. Nothing overly dramatic, just two people who knew each other well enough to trust without question. I never doubted that we were on the same page in that aspect. But as I look back now, I realized that perhaps I was too comfortable, too certain that nothing could disrupt the life we had built. And when you get too comfortable, you miss the subtle signs, the small shifts that could signal something much larger brewing beneath the surface. There's one thing that's going to be important in this story, something that might not seem like a big deal at first, but it's worth mentioning. See, my wife and I had been together for a long time, and like most couples, things changed over the years. One of those changes was that we stopped using condoms a while ago. It wasn't some big decision or conversation, it just kind of happened naturally. It had become a part of our routine, something neither of us thought about anymore. But looking back, that small detail is something that sticks out to me now. You get used to certain things in a marriage, and this is one of those things. It was more comfortable that way, more intimate, I guess you could say. When you're with someone for years, those little changes in the bedroom are a sign of trust. You don't even have to talk about it. It's just understood. We trusted each other, and this was one of those unspoken agreements between us. It was something that made things easier, smoother, and frankly, it felt better. There's no point in pretending otherwise. Without the barrier, everything just felt more connected, more real. It's strange how small habits can become so deeply ingrained in a relationship. For us, it was like second nature, not even worth mentioning. We had our routine, this was part of it. I never thought twice about it. It wasn't like we were reckless, it was just that, over time, it didn't feel necessary. We were comfortable. We trusted each other. And honestly, the experience was different, better even. It made everything feel more intimate, more natural. There was a sense of closeness that came with it, something that, at the time, felt like an advantage. I never questioned it because, in my mind, there was no reason to. We were a married couple, after all. It was a sign we were on the same page, that nothing stood between us, literally and figuratively. If anything, it was a benefit. No hassle, no awkward pauses, just the two of us. It became normal, something that didn't need discussion. We both seemed to enjoy the change, and it just stuck. It wasn't until much later that I would start to realize how this simple detail would play a part in unraveling everything. Thinking about it now, it's clear how much I took for granted. I trusted her completely, and that's why I never thought anything of it. I never expected that this small, almost forgettable habit would come back around in such a significant way. But looking back, it's easy to see how it all connects. There's something unsettling about how the smallest, most mundane details can end up meaning so much more than you ever imagined. At the time, it felt like an improvement. It was one less thing to worry about, one less obstacle between us. I thought it brought us closer, made us more in sync with each other. And for a long time, it did. But now I wonder if it wasn't just another way I allowed myself to be blinded by routine, by the comfort thinking everything was fine when, in reality, it wasn't. It's funny how you can overlook the most obvious things when you're too close to the situation. We had settled into this routine, and I never thought to question it. But that's how it works, isn't it? You get so used to something that you forget to look deeper, to see if there's more going on than you realize. Little did I know, that decision to stop using condoms would turn out to be a lot more significant than I could have ever predicted. And now, thinking back, it feels like a detail I should have paid more attention to. It started subtly, almost unnoticeably at first. My wife began coming home later than usual, just by a few minutes, nothing major. At first, I didn't think much of it. Work could run late from time to time, and she always had a reasonable explanation. But then it became more frequent. What started as the occasional late arrival turned into a regular pattern. She'd walk in half an hour or so after me, apologizing lightly, mentioning how busy things had been at the office. It seemed innocent enough, but when you live with someone for years, you notice when routines start shifting. After a couple of weeks of this, I finally asked her about it. It wasn't like her to keep staying late at work, and we were usually home around the same time, without fail. I wasn't accusatory, just curious. I asked her why she'd been coming home later so often. She looked at me casually, as if it hadn't even occurred to her that I might notice or care. She said that her colleagues had decided to start doing some team building after work. They wanted to bond more outside the office, given how much time they spent together in a professional environment without really knowing each other on a personal level. She explained it wasn't anything out of the ordinary, just a few of them grabbing a coffee or a quick drink after hours. According to her, it was good for morale, and it wasn't every day, just a couple of times a week. She brushed it off like it was no big deal, making it sound like something every workplace does. I remember her smiling when she mentioned it, like she was just trying to fit in with her coworkers, nothing more. I didn't push it. I trusted her, and in my mind it made sense. Work relationships could be important, and I wasn't the type to restrict her socializing. Still, something about it fell off. Maybe it was the way she downplayed it, or the fact that this new habit started so suddenly. We'd been married long enough that I could usually tell when something was on her mind. But she seemed so casual about the whole thing, so I let it go. Maybe I was just overthinking it, I told myself. After all, team building wasn't something to be suspicious about. People do it all the time, right? I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, questioning every little change. So, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I started paying closer attention to the times she'd come home and how she acted afterward. I wasn't accusing her of anything, but the consistency of her lateness, the frequency of these after-work meetups, was starting to bother me. I could feel a small knot of doubt forming in my mind, but I wasn't ready to confront it yet. After all, she'd always been trustworthy. Why would I start questioning her now? This team-building thing, harmless as it seemed on the surface, had planted a seed of doubt in my mind. And once doubt starts to take root, it's hard to ignore it, no matter how much you try to convince yourself otherwise. I told myself it was fine. After her explanation about the team building and bonding with her colleagues, I didn't push the issue further. I'm not the type to micromanage or question her every move. If she needed to stay late a few nights a week, then so be it. But as time passed, the late nights started to become more frequent. What was once a couple of times a week turned into nearly every evening. She began coming home later and later, and when she did, she seemed different. It was subtle at first, just a little more tired than usual, a little less talkative. But it was there. One night, though, everything escalated. I remember sitting in the living room waiting for her to come home. The clock's ticking, and it was getting late. Later than usual. When she finally stumbled through the door, I knew immediately that something was wrong. She was drunk, completely out of it. I'd never seen her like this before. She could barely stand on her own 2 feet, swaying and mumbling incoherently. Her hair was a mess, her clothes disheveled. I stood up, trying to keep calm as she staggered towards me. She started reaching for me, slurring her words, trying to kiss me, but I gently pushed her away, guiding her toward the bedroom instead. I wasn't angry in that moment, just confused. Where had she been? Why was she this drunk? She wasn't the type to drink like this, especially not when she knew she had to come home. As I helped towards the bedroom, she kept mumbling under her breath, something about her bag. Where's my bag? Damn it, where did I leave my bag? She kept repeating over and over again. It was strange. Out of everything that had happened, her mind seemed fixated on that bag. I tried to ignore it at first, thinking she was just rambling in her drunken state. But she wouldn't stop. Even as I helped her to bed, she kept muttering about the bag, frustration creeping to her voice. I can't believe I lost it. It was odd, to say the least. She wasn't usually one to lose things, especially not something as important as her purse. And the way she was going on about it made me wonder if there was more to it. Why was she so obsessed with finding it? I got her into bed and tried to calm her down, but her focus was still on that damn bag. She was practically half asleep, eyes fluttering closed, but she wouldn't stop talking about it. I need it. Where did I leave it? She kept repeating, her voice trailing off as sleep finally took over. I stood there for a moment, looking down at her, trying to make sense of everything. The team building, the late nights, the drinking, and now this obsession with her lost bag. It didn't add up. My mind began to race. What could be so important in the bag that she'd be this worked up about it, even her drunken state? Was it just the alcohol talking, or was there something more to it? I couldn't shake the feeling there was something she wasn't telling me. Something in that bag that she didn't want to lose. I didn't have any answers, just a growing sense of unease. I left her to sleep, but I couldn't stop thinking about the bag. What could be in there that had her so rattled? It wasn't like her to be careless, and it wasn't like her to get this drunk. Something was off, and that bag felt like a key to whatever was going on. I didn't have much to go on, just her drunken mumbling, but it was enough to make me wonder. The next morning I woke up before she did, still thinking about that damn bag. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important about it. She had been so worked up about losing it, even in her drunken state, and that wasn't like her. I figured I'd try to find it myself. Maybe it was just her wallet, maybe her phone, something didn't sit right with me. So, I started searching around the house. After a few minutes of looking, I finally found the bag tossed carelessly in the hallway, half hidden under a chair. I picked it up, feeling a strange sense of tension building inside me. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find, but I knew I had to check. Opening the bag, I went through the usual her keys, some makeup, a couple of receipts. But nothing out of the ordinary. No wallet, no phone. There was nothing in there that should have caused the panic I'd seen in her last night. It made no sense. Why had she been so obsessed with finding this bag if there was nothing important in it? That's when I realized her phone wasn't on the nightstand where she usually left it. It had to be in the bag. Digging a little deeper, I found it at the bottom, tucked away under a few crumpled receipts. I hesitated for a second before turning it on. I'm not the type to snoop through her phone, at least. I never had been before, but something told me I needed to look. I unlocked the screen, and that's when I saw a message from her friend. The preview on the lock screen read, "Pete tomorrow." My heart sank. Repeat what I thought. I stared at the phone for a few seconds, feeling a knot form in my stomach. It wasn't conclusive, but it was enough to raise alarms. I opened the full message, and it was exactly what I feared. Her friend was suggesting they meet up again, hinting at something that had clearly happened the night before. The casual tone of the message was what threw me off the most, as if this was something normal for them. I didn't know what to think. My mind was racing with possibilities. I decided to call her friend. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But I had to know. I dialed her number, and after a few rings, she picked up. Her voice was much clearer than my wife's had been the night before. I could tell she wasn't as drunk. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "How was last night?" My wife still passed out drunk, and I was trying to figure out what happened. There was a brief pause on the other end before she answered. "Oh, she was pretty out of it by the end. We were just having a good time, but I think she overdid it. You might want to keep an eye on her," she said, her voice a little too light for my liking. Then she added, almost an afterthought, "Just make sure you're giving her enough attention, you know? Sometimes she seems off." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Give her more attention, what the hell was that supposed to mean? I tried to keep calm, but my mind was spiraling. What was she implying? I asked a few more questions, but her answers were vague, almost dismissive. She wrapped up the conversation quickly, leaving me with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear: something wasn't right, and this wasn't just about a drunken night out with friends. I hung up the phone, staring at the screen. My wife was still asleep in the next room, completely oblivious. My mind was racing. Why had her friend made that comment about giving her more attention? And why had she been so casual about what had clearly been a mess of a night? Something was off, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. Not long after that first incident, it happened again. She told me she was going out with her friend for the evening, nothing unusual. I was still uneasy from the last time, but I didn't say anything. I figured I'd let it play out. Maybe I was overthinking things, maybe I wasn't. But when she came home that night, even more drunk than before, the knot in my stomach tightened. She stumbled through the door, barely able to walk straight, slurring her words again. This time, though, her attitude was different. As soon as I approached her, trying to help her like I had before, she pushed me away. "Don't touch me," she mumbled, her words thick and incoherent. "I'll handle it in the morning." I froze for a second, not sure what she meant. Handle what? Her whole demeanor had shifted. It wasn't just the drunkenness, it was the way she was acting, almost like she didn't want me anywhere near her. It wasn't just physical distance, there's something else, something that made me feel like I was being deliberately shut out. She stumbled toward the bedroom on her own, muttering under her breath again, though this time it was more dismissive, like I was an afterthought. "I'll find tomorrow," she kept saying, though I wasn't sure what she meant. It didn't matter whatever she was talking about. I knew I had to find out for myself. I was on high alert now, my suspicions from the last time bubbling up again. Something was going on, and I wasn't going to let it slide this time. As I watched her collapse into bed, passing out almost immediately, I knew I had to check her bag again. There was no way this was just a coincidence. The same pattern, the same drunken behavior, the same obsession with something she had lost, it was too much to ignore. I waited a few minutes to make sure she was fully asleep before I started looking. My mind was racing, filled with questions I didn't yet have answers to. I searched around the house, trying to remember where she had left her things this time. The last time, it had taken a while to find her bag, and I had no reason to believe this time would be any different. But I wasn't going to stop until I found it. Eventually, I spotted her purse, lying haphazardly on the floor near the kitchen. I felt my pulse quicken as I bent down to pick it up. This time, I was determined. I opened the bag, rifling through its contents with more urgency than before. As I rummaged through her bag, my heart raced. I flipped through her wallet again, hoping for anything that could explain her behavior. But then, right at the bottom of the bag, I spotted something that made my stomach drop. It was a crumpled piece of foil, and as I pulled it out, my worst fears were confirmed. It was a used condom. Not just any condom, but one of those giant-sized ones. My mind struggled to process what I was holding, my hands shaking as I dropped it back into the bag. What the hell was going on? I felt a rush of anger and betrayal flood through me. My mind raced back to the night she had come home late, the strange behavior, the constant drinking. This was no longer just drunk outings with friends, this was infidelity. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to confront her right then and there, but instead, I forced myself to breathe, trying to stay calm and think clearly. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I grabbed her phone and quickly dialed her friend's number. My hands trembled as I waited for her to pick up, the weight of the used condom heavy in my thoughts. When she finally answered, her voice was bright and cheerful, completely at odds with my rage. "Hey, what's up?" she said, sounding far too casual. "Where the hell have you been?" I snapped, cutting straight to the point. "What happened last night? I just found something in her bag that explains everything, and I need to know what went down." My tone was sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. I was furious, and I wanted her to understand that. There was a pause on the other end, a slight shift in her tone. "What do you mean? What did you find?" she asked, her voice suddenly serious. "What's going on?" I could almost hear her bracing herself for my answer. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my anger in check. "I found a used condom in her bag, one that's way too big for me to ignore. You need to tell me what's going on. Did she sleep with someone?" I heard her intake of breath, a clear sign she was caught off guard. "Oh my God," she said slowly, her voice dropping an octave. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry? That's it? You need to give me more than that." What happened? My heart raced as I listened to her stammer through her words, trying to explain. "I thought she was just going to unwind, you know? I had no idea it would go that far," she admitted, sounding genuinely remorseful. "She wanted to have fun, and I just thought she would be okay. I warned her to be careful. I thought she'd come to her senses and just have a good time without going overboard." The betrayal stung deeper than I ever expected. This was no accident. It was a decision made by my wife, and her friend had been complicit. Anger boiled inside me, and I felt a cold sense of determination wash over me. I couldn't let this go unanswered. There would be consequences for what they had done. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, my voice ice cold. "But I'm not letting this slide. I'm going to make sure she knows exactly what she's done." I hung up the phone, a plan already forming in my mind. It was time to make them both face the reality of their choices. After hanging up the phone, I felt a rush of adrenaline. My hands were steady now, and my mind was clear. I picked up her bag again, the weight of it feeling more like a weapon than a simple accessory. This was my chance to expose the truth. I fished out the used condom once more, glaring at it. This little piece of rubber was a testament to her betrayal, and I wanted to make sure everyone saw it. I had to do something bold, something that would make her realize the gravity of her actions. I grabbed my own phone and took a quick photo of the condom alongside her bag. The flash illuminated the dark corners of the room, and I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction as I captured the evidence. This is going to make waves, I thought to myself. I was done being the passive husband. It was time to turn the tables and show her exactly what she had done. As I opened up social media, my heart raced with anticipation. I selected the photo, careful to get the right angle that would capture both the bag and condom. I typed out a caption, feeling the fury boil inside me. Ayash Luka, that was perfect. It summed up everything I want to say without holding back. I wasn't just going to expose her, I was going to make her the laughingstock of her social circle. I hesitated for just a moment, considering the potential fallout, but the anger drowned out any lingering doubt. I pressed post and watched the notification flash on my screen. There was no turning back now. I knew this would create a storm. I didn't care. She had crossed a line, and it was time for her to face the consequences. Once the post was live, I threw her phone back into her bag and sat down on the couch, waiting. I could hear her stirring in the bedroom, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was it. She was about to wake up to the chaos she had created. I imagined her reaction as she scrolled through her notifications, the disbelief turning panic. Would she realize that this wasn't just a simple mistake? Minutes felt like hours as I waited. I could hear her shuffling around in the bedroom, mumbling incoherently as she pieced together what had happened the night before. I pictured her sitting up, rubbing her eyes, and then glancing at her phone. The moment she saw the post, I would finally have my moment of clarity. I could barely contain my excitement. Finally, I heard her footsteps approach the living room. She peered, disheveled and confused, her hair a mess. As she reached for her phone, I could see her expression shift from groggy to alert. The reality of what she was about to face was crashing down on her like a wave. "What the hell did you do?" she yelled, her eyes wide with disbelief as she caught sight of my smirk. The confrontation I had been waiting for was finally here. I leaned back on the couch, ready to watch her unravel. This was the reckoning she deserved. Her scream pierced through the air, a mixture of anger and disbelief. "What did you do? What is this?" She waved her phone in front of me, her face flushed with fury. I could see her mind racing, trying to process public exposure of her betrayal. For a moment, I relished the chaos I had unleashed, but I also knew this wouldn't end quietly. Before I'd respond, she lunged at me, fists flying. I was caught off guard, and she landed a couple of punches against my chest. They were weak, fueled more by shock than real aggression. It was almost laughable how uncoordinated her attempts were, but I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me react. I sidestepped her and grabbed her by the shoulders, pushing her back onto the couch. "Listen to me," I said, my voice low and steady, a stark contrast to her raging emotions. "You cheated on me. You think you can just sneak around and keep it hidden? No, people deserve to know who you really are." I watched as her expression shifted from anger to fear, the reality of her situation dawning on her. She opened her mouth to protest, but I raised my hand to silence her. "If you try to hit me again, it won't be a game," I continued, my voice hardening. "You will not be a woman to me, you'll be a partner for sparring. You're not going to walk all over me anymore." I saw the color drain from her face. I meant every word, and she needed to understand the weight of her actions. The room was thick with tension as we stared at each other, the reality of our situation hanging heavily in the air. I could feel my heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I wasn't just defending myself, I was reclaiming my power. This wasn't just about the betrayal, it was about establishing boundaries and demanding respect. "Do you understand?" I asked, my tone sharpening. "You've made your choice, and now you'll deal with the consequences. I won't be your punching bag or your fool. You want to play games? Well, this is the final round." She opened her mouth to argue, to throw out more excuses, but I didn't want to hear it. I had reached my limit. There was no more room for negotiation or emotional manipulation. I had watched her unravel for too long, and now she was faced with the reality of what her actions had brought upon us. "Get your things together," I said, taking a step back and crossing my arms. "I don't want to see you here anymore. You've chosen your path, and now you have to walk it alone." I could see the realization hit her. There was no turning back from this. She had made her choices, and now she would face the fallout. For the first time, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was the closure I needed, a way to regain control of my life. As she sat there, stunned and defeated, I knew that I was finally ready to move on. I took a deep breath, my heart still pounding from the confrontation. The anger simmered beneath the surface as I looked at her, trying to understand how we had ended up here. "What the hell were you thinking?" I demanded, my voice steady but laced with disbelief. "You had everything. We had a good life together, and you just threw it all away. Why did you cheat on me?" She shifted uncomfortably on the couch, avoiding my gaze. I could see the mix of shame and defiance in her eyes, and it only fueled my frustration. "You don't understand," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Things were different. I felt unfilled. It was just so boring. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What? Boring?" I shot back, my anger flaring again. "We had a routine, sure, but that's part of life. You don't just go running to someone else because you think it's dull. You talk to me, you communicate. You had every opportunity to express what you wanted, but you chose to betray me instead." My voice rose with each word, filled with incredulity. She shook her head, tears starting to well up in her eyes. "It's not just that. In bed, things just didn't work for me anymore. I needed something different," she admitted, her voice trembling. It felt like a slap in the face. "So you decided to screw someone else? That's your solution?" I spat, disbelief written all over my face. "You could have come to me. We could have figured this out together." "But you don't understand," she protested, rising from the couch. "I tried to tell you, but it never went anywhere. It felt like you didn't care, like you were just going through the motions." Her tone turned defensive, as if she were justifying her actions. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. I thought it would be a one-time thing, and then it turned into something more." "Something more?" I echoed, incredulous. "So now it's okay to lie and betray your husband because you weren't getting your kicks in bed? What you've done is unforgivable, and you still don't get it. You don't just get to waltz back in here like nothing happened." She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "I'm not leaving. I don't want to go anywhere," she said defiantly. "I still want to work on this. We can fix it." I know her determination caught me off guard, but the audacity only infuriated me more. "No, you don't get to decide that anymore," I replied, firm in my stance. "You've already made your choice, and now you have faced the consequences. I won't be part of this twisted charade. If you truly want to work on something, then start by being honest, and right now that means you need to leave." The room fell silent as she stood there, arms crossed, refusing to budge. The tension hung thick in the air, but I knew what I had to do. I wouldn't let her manipulate me into feeling guilty for finally standing up for myself. If she wanted to play games, she could do so outside of my life. The silence between us was suffocating. I'd see the mix of shock and defiance on her face, but I was done playing games. I walked past her, my resolve strengthening with every step. I headed to the bedroom where her things were scattered, remnants of life we once shared. I was tired of looking at the evidence of her betrayal. It was time to clear it all out. I opened the closet and began tossing her clothes into a pile. Shirts, dresses, even the shoes she loved so much, they all landed in a heap on the floor. I'd hear her footsteps following me, the sound of her desperation growing louder. "What are you doing? You can't just throw my stuff out," she yelled, her voice rising in pitch. But I ignored her, focusing instead on the task at hand. Next, I moved to her drawers, pulling out her belongings with little care. I shoved them into the pile, a mix of cosmetics and trinkets falling to the floor. "You don't get to keep any of this," I said, my voice cold. "You chose to betray me, and now you're going to face the reality of your decisions." It felt liberating to assert my control, even as she protested behind me. "Please just stop. We talk about this," she pleaded, her voice tinged with panic. But I wasn't interested in talking anymore. The words had lost their meaning the moment she decided to cheat. "You should have thought about that before you slept with someone else." I shot back, determination driving my actions. With her belongings now piled high, I opened the front door and stepped outside. I dumped her things unceremoniously onto the porch, watching as they tumbled out. I could feel a sense of finality in that moment. It was a physical representation of the end of our relationship. She stood behind me, stunned into silence, but I didn't look back. As I turned to face her, I could see the tears streaming down her face. She was defeated, but I felt no pity. "This is your doing," I said, my tone firm. "You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. Don't come back here. It's over." With those words hanging heavy in the air, I closed the door, sealing off the remnants of our life together. The finality of my actions settled in as I stood by the door, staring at her with unwavering resolve. The reality of what had just happened felt surreal, yet there was no escaping it. "You need to leave," I said, my voice steady low. "I don't want you in my life anymore." Not after this. The weight of those words hung heavy between us, a definitive line drawn in the sand. Her expression shifted from shock to desperation. "You can't just kick me out. We've built a life together," she pleaded, her voice rising as panic set in. I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. I was beyond that now. What life? I counted sharply. "You shattered everything with your betrayal. You've made your choices, and now you have to deal with the consequences. Please, just give me a chance to explain," she said, her voice trembling. I shook my head, cutting her off. "There's nothing to explain. You've already shown me who you really are. You don't get to play the victim here. You've destroyed our marriage, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen." The anger bubbled beneath the surface, and I had no intention of letting it go. "I'll fight for us," she exclaimed, desperation lacing her words. "I love you. I'll change," but her proclamations felt empty to me. How could I trust someone who had so easily tossed aside our vows? "Love? You call that love?" I replied, incredulous. "What you did was nothing short of betrayal. I won't be your fool. You can't just say you love me now after what you've done." With each moment that passed, I felt my determination hardening. "I'm filing for divorce," I stated firmly. The finality of those words resonated in the room. I watched her face as she processed what I had just said. The color drained from her cheeks, and I could see fear creeping in. "You can't be serious," she shouted, her voice cracking. "You're throwing everything away." "Yes, I am, I said, my tone unwavering. You've already thrown it all away. This isn't just a disagreement, this is about trust and respect. You violated that trust, and I won't allow you to manipulate me into feeling guilty. It's over. I took a step back, creating space between us, a physical barrier reflecting the emotional divide that had grown. She reached for me, her desperation palpable. Don't do this. We can work through it, but I was done listening to empty promises. You've made your bed, I replied, crossing my arms in defiance. You have to lie in it. I've already made my decision. You need to pack your things and leave. Her shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her as the reality of my words sank in. The look in her eyes shifted from anger to despair, and I could feel my heart harden further. I had given her chances, and she had squandered them all. You can't just throw me away like this, she said softly, but I knew there was no turning back. I was reclaiming my life, and I wouldn't let her destroy that. The divorce process was an agonizing experience, filled with tension and legal battles. I expected the emotional turmoil, but nothing prepared me for the drawn-out negotiations and the bitterness that lingered. It felt like we were two strangers fighting over remnants of a life we had once built together. The courtroom became a battleground where every word felt loaded, each question a reminder of the betrayal. I was determined to make clear that I wouldn't settle for less than what I deserved. As we sat across from each other, I could see the same defiance in her eyes that had fueled her betrayal. She tried to play the victim, painting herself as the misunderstood partner who was desperate to make amends. But I wouldn't allow her to twist the narrative. You made your choices, I reminded her during the mediation sessions. And now you'll face the consequences. The legal proceedings dragged on, often punctuated by her attempts to manipulate the situation. She would sometimes cry, claiming that she wanted to reconcile, but I saw through her act. I had already mourned the loss of our relationship. I wasn't about to let her back into my life. I focused on gathering evidence, making sure to secure my rights to our shared assets. It felt liberating to stand firm, to not let her sway me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached a settlement. The day I signed the divorce papers, a weight lifted off my shoulders. I could finally breathe again. It was the closure I needed. I walked out of the courthouse with a newfound sense of freedom, ready to reclaim my life. I spent the following days sorting through my feelings and finding out who I was without her. Meanwhile, her life took a different turn. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she struggled to find stability after our separation. She moved in with her parents and began to face the consequences of her choices. The vibrant social life she had tried to maintain faded quickly as friends distanced themselves from the fallout. The persona she had cultivated crumbled under the weight of reality. She learned that actions have consequences, and they often follow you long after the initial decision. As for me, I began to rediscover my passions and interests. I started spending time with friends, exploring hobbies that had taken a backseat during our marriage. I focused on my career, pouring my energy into projects that had been sidelined. It felt invigorating to rediscover myself, to chase after the goals I had set aside for years. I even started dating again, although cautiously. I wasn't ready to dive headfirst into another relationship, but I was open to the possibility. The emotional scars of the betrayal lingered, but they no longer controlled my life. I had learned valuable lessons about trust and self-worth, and I was determined not to repeat past mistakes. I took my time healing, focusing on building a life that was authentically mine. Looking back, I realized that divorce was not just an ending but a necessary beginning. It was painful, yes, but it also provided an opportunity to reclaim my power and move forward with purpose. As for her, I hoped she would learn from her mistakes, but I couldn't concern myself with that. My priority was to ensure that I never found myself in such a situation again. The future was my shape, and I intend to do just that.